Let's go to Zoe McKenzie, the federal Liberal member for the seat of Flinders, just outside Melbourne. Thanks for joining us, Zoe. Just on this issue, where we are on election watch, of course, just how prominently do you think that immigration and these related issues of security and social cohesion will figure in the election campaign?
Look, I think it is quite front of mind, but largely because people know that this government has brought 1.8 million people into Australia without doing the necessary work in terms of infrastructure. My electorate has lost $300 million of earlier budgeted infrastructure spending in road and rail, and how you can bring people into the country without making sure they can get around, go to school, go to a hospital, get a job, bring in the skills we need. That's the problem. It's unplanned migration, unconstrained migration, not thought through migration. Generally speaking, you would have seen this, Chris, citizenship ceremonies are the best thing we get to do as members of parliament, welcoming to people of Australia. Their pride, their excitement, their enthusiasm for this country is raw and magnificent. I'm all for it, but you've got to do the hard work in terms of the planning. And that's what we see at the moment. We've got a housing crisis in this country precisely because housing builds approvals are going backwards. They were 1,500 in my electorate in 2017, and they're about 280 this year so far, and we're not too far from the end of the financial year. So the planning hasn't been done and the infrastructure has been taken away rather than increased.
What about the mix of migration, though? When we're looking at that Islamist terrorism on the rise in Europe, when we're looking at the rampant anti-Semitism in Australia and those attitudes we saw in that video next week, don't we need to be more vigilant about who we're bringing in here in case they are expanding, perpetuating or fomenting Islamist extremism, among other forms of extremism?
Obviously, we raised concerns at the time that about 2,500 visas were issued to people coming from the Palestinian territories, many of them on tourist visas. We were looking at comparisons in the US, UK, Canada and France, who were taking nothing like the numbers we were taking. Our fear at that time, well expressed and explained to the Australian public, was that the necessary checks were not being done. When we've been in a similar kind of environment in previous administrations, people wanting to come to Australia had either been interviewed or taken to a third country while all the proper checks were being done. That did not happen here. But nevertheless, the main issue is you can't just bring 1.8 million people to Australia in 2 or 3 years and not expect flow-on effects, whether that's housing, schooling, health, or just cost of living pressures, because of course it's driving inflation up.
Now, talking about the election, if the polling that we have now was reflected at election time, you're most likely to get a hung parliament. Very tough for the coalition to win those crossbench members over. Most of them are left of centre. Could the coalition actually work with any of the Teals?
Look, as we know, the Teal voting record is roughly 75% with the Greens. In fact, more with the Greens than even they are with Labor. So I'm not holding out enormous hope. There are some there, though, that I think are really constructive, quite economically minded. I get along with them really well, and so I hope I will have the chance to do that in a future parliament as well. But it's not something you can count on. But may I say, a hung parliament is in no one's interest. We have been there before and it was abject chaos for years. You end up with the tail wagging the dog, and the tail in this situation, should Labor try and form government in a hung parliament, will be the Greens party wagging the Labor dog. And we're already seeing vast impacts on our business community through green red tape in particular and additional cost on business, all of which is being passed on to the consumer. A hung parliament is in no one's interest. We've never had a good run in this country. Let's not try now.
Thanks for joining us, Zoe. I appreciate it. Zoe McKenzie there. Yeah, and the teals are just another shade of green, of course. Shocking colour, teal. It's the colour of Port Adelaide, isn't it? What more do you want to know?